one of the biggest questions people have when they hear about conscious manifestation is, how do we create from what you call presence and not from our egoic self? And how do we know the difference in our own experience when we're interested in manifesting something? Is this coming from presence or the ego?
Yes, that's a good question. It's not always easy to tell the difference, because self-knowledge is one of the most difficult things to master in this world. It's so easy to deceive oneself. So when you're motivated by ego, so you want to create something, to whatever it may be, to build something in the world, whether it's a structure, a business, some artistic creation, a book, or some other structure that perhaps you think might benefit the world, or perhaps in your eyes, more importantly, might benefit you, that's where the ego comes in, so that you begin to look for that particular endeavor that you become engaged in, consciously or unconsciously. You look to it as a way of enhancing your sense of self, or finding some kind of ultimate fulfillment. Once you achieve what you want to achieve, then in your eyes you will become more fully yourself, or become important in the eyes of the world, recognized, become liberated from an underlying sense of lack or insufficiency that is always a companion of the egoic consciousness, is always an underlying sense of lack or insufficiency, of not enough. And so you look to something to become free of that and get a sense of deep satisfaction. And that those things are then motivated by ego. And you may not know it, but it might look like you have a very good intention. The mind can, the egoic mind can very easily deceive itself. It's very good at that. So it says, oh, I'm doing that because I'm a very selfless person, and all I want is the best for humanity. And how do you know that you're not lying to yourself? How do you know that the ego is not lying to yourself? Well, once you start becoming active in whatever it is that you want to create, observe yourself and see what your state of consciousness is at any given time. If you find that frequently stress arises, the moment you encounter an obstacle, everybody who is engaged in creating anything new, whether you want to write a book or paint a painting or learn a skill, a dance or whatever it may be, or create a business or open a restaurant, it doesn't matter what it is, you will encounter obstacles on your path. And if you find that very quickly when you encounter obstacles, you become frustrated and stressed or angry and irritated, that's a good sign that there's the ego being frustrated and reacting to the obstacle. If, however, you encounter an obstacle and you're able to not react negatively, but look at the obstacle, face it, and immediately become alert and still, and so you connect with that which is beyond ego, the unconditioned consciousness, which is the alertness, which is the stillness, and then you deal with the obstacle. In other words, the obstacle in whatever way it manifests, is not regarded as an enemy. The ego loves enemies and is very quick to find new enemies. So the ego will treat every hindrance, every obstacle that arises as almost either an animal or a personal insult, or people or the universe are out to sabotage what I want to do. That's always the ego's reaction. So as you're engaged in the doing, in your activity, just observe how you deal with obstacles that inevitably arise, and that can tell you a lot about whether the ego is there or a deeper purpose is being activated through you that transcends the ego. That's one way. Another way is, are you able, is there an enjoyment in what you do? Or are you so focused on the desired outcome that all the doing that you're engaged in order to arrive at the desired outcome, is regarded as just a means to an end? And if the ego is there, a lot of the time, you're not even enjoying your activity. You're doing it in a state of stress very often, because you want to arrive at this future point that promises fulfillment one way or another. So the lack of enjoyment in what you do is a good sign that the ego is operating through you. Or it can also take over something that initially was free of ego. So it's not always the question of, it's either ego or something deeper that is motivating me. It could be that your initial motivation might be come from a deeper level. I want to create, let's say, I want to create a healing center or for humans or for animals. And so, because I would truly want to help humans or animals. Okay, that comes from a deeper level. And as you become active in the doing, it does not mean that you necessarily remain free of egoic contamination, but by the original pure intention, as you start operating and acting, can, if you're not aware enough, if you're not conscious, not present enough, the ego can come in and contaminate what you do. And then again, before long, you encounter negativity and stress, and you're fighting with people, you have enemies. And so the ego can, it's important to realize that the ego can contaminate something that perhaps originally was relatively or completely free of ego. And this is not uncommon. I have observed in many cases people in places like churches, spiritual centers, healing centers, places where people are supposed to heal, hospitals. There's an enormous amount of infighting that people are getting extremely stressful. You go to a meeting of that, it's not uncommon. Here you have a healing center or spiritual center, and then the leading people, they come together in a meeting, and everybody's extremely stressed, and they very easily can lose their original purpose. And so the ego has come back in because they were not able to hold the frequency that transcends ego, the frequency of presence. So you have to be careful. Even if your initial intention was egoless and good, it is possible that the ego can creep back in. Or, of course, the original intention might already have been ego. So observe yourself as you are engaged in your whatever your activity is, and see how you deal with obstacles and other human beings. How you treat others. You have a goal, but what is the quality of your doing in the present moment? That can tell you where the motivation, where the energy comes from, whether it's egoic or where it comes from a deeper non-egoic level. How do you interact with others who are cooperating with you or who you need to help you with this or that, or they become part of your business transactions or whatever you do, clients or whatever. How is your relationship with those human beings? And again, if you find antagonism arising frequently, hostility, anger, reactivity, then a clear sign, okay, there's the ego at work. Whenever you discover the ego in yourself, it doesn't mean you have failed. The moment you become aware that the ego is active in you, you've actually achieved a brief moment of transcendence of ego, because to become aware of your ego in you, that means there's enough awareness that has arisen so that you can observe yourself. And so in that moment, you're no longer in the grip of the ego. So the more ego you discover in yourself in the moment, sometimes not in the moment, sometimes you discover afterwards, after an interaction with someone, you suddenly realize, oh, that was all ego. There was antagonism, there was making the other wrong, there was blaming, all the egoic strategies. These things were at work, and you might not have realized in the moment that these things were at work. Perhaps afterwards, you go home and suddenly you think back of what just happened, and then you realize, oh, that was the ego. Okay, that's better than not realizing it at all. It would have been even better if you had realized in the moment of the ego showing itself and taking over. If you had realized in the moment, that would have been that. And that's quite possible for people who practice presence, that increasingly, as the ego operates and you recognize it, and you realize the ego is not your strength. The ego likes to pretend that it is that which makes you strong, but the ego is that which that prevents you from accessing the creative power of the universe that's actually within you. So the real power is there, and the pseudo power is the borrowed power of the ego. It's a bit like reflected sunlight. The moon reflects the sunlight. It has no light of its own. And so the ego's power is a reflection of the true power that is beyond ego. So it's a secondary power. And it's not power. There's another word that I would prefer to use because it's more apt. It's force. The ego is force. And then there's the power is that which transcends the ego. It's a silent, very powerful energy emanation. Another interesting thing is when you are not coming from ego, it is possible, if not likely, that as you start acting, yes, you do whatever, one step after another, you're conscious of every step, and you may find that suddenly, at some point in your endeavor, you access an energy flow, and everything you do becomes so empowered that you yourself are astonished, and people around you may be astonished, because there's this enormous power that flows through you. And this is how the greatest creations have happened, how people like the great composers, Beethoven, Mozart, how they could compose the unbelievable works of art. They said, how can a human produce something? And the answer is, well, it wasn't quite the human that produced it. Something, they accessed an enormous energy stream that came from the source of all life, which is within you, which is one with the source, the universe. And so it suddenly, also what can happen is synchronistic events suddenly happen. So suddenly helpful things that suddenly appear in the form of people or situations. Not that, as I just earlier mentioned, obstacles. Anybody who creates something new will encounter obstacles. But as the energy builds up, you will encounter also the opposite of obstacles, and that may be encounter that more frequently after a while than the obstacles. And that is helpful circumstances suddenly appearing seemingly out of nowhere. So these are often in the form of synchronistic events. Just at the right moment, the right thing is there, you encounter it. And so I mentioned also in the New Earth, the book, that when you are in a period of intense creativity, then the energy that you encounter we could call that enthusiasm. You're filled with enthusiasm, which is a high frequency energy. I experienced that when I was writing the books, The Power of Now, New Earth, Stillness Speaks. There's an enormous intensity of energy that goes. So you're in this high alertness, and you can feel that you are just something else, something is happening through you, and that's wonderful when you encounter that, when it happens. To an external observer, this might look almost as you were in a state of stress because there's such high energy, but there's no stress in it whatsoever. There's a big, huge difference between stressful doing and empowered doing. A huge, huge difference. And empowered doing is essentially enjoyable. You're in a state of enthusiasm, which the origin of that word is in God. You're connected with one could say that if you're comfortable with that term, the divine in you, and the divine in you, the greater intelligence operates through you. You are in God, connected to the divine. And so to summarize, or put in the most simple terms, enjoyment of what you're doing could be, if you just want to put in a nutshell what I've just been talking about, enjoyment what you're doing is a sign that the ego is not operating, because the ego, yes, it can enjoy it for brief times, but whenever something happens, it's not enjoying itself anymore. So continuous enjoyment of what you do is a sign that you're not motivated by the ego. And lack of antagonism, hostility, and stress, and great empowerment. So it's a wonderful adventure to be engaged in this. At any given moment, the question is, what is my state of consciousness right now? That's a fundamental question that you need to ask yourself, and then you need to be alert and be honest and know, and then you know whether you're in the grip of ego or not. I could go on talking about this another 2 or 3 hours, but I won't. Let's stop here.